Thanks everybody, for joining. First of all, it's my pleasure to introduce Cassandra Lambert. She is the Continuous Improvement and Education Manager for the Office of Human Resource Protections at WVU. She began her career at the University of Colorado, where she served as an IRB review specialist before moving on to a role with the University of Kentucky, also with quality improvement, education, and outreach. So her fun fact is she has visited more than 60 countries. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to her and let her get into event reporting at WVU. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining today, and thank you to CTSI for having me for this toolkit. You may notice that I am presenting alone today, and it was advertised as a co-presentation with Jessica Williams, also from the Office of Human Subjects Research Protection. Jessica is leaving the university. Today's her last day, so take this opportunity to announce that for those of you who may not be in the know, and I'll be transitioning to interim assistant director starting Monday. So this will be my last presentation with this job title, I hope. But again, thank you so much for joining today. We thought this was an important topic and also can be a confusing topic. So we hope that you will share any questions you may have and use this opportunity to seek any clarity, and that really this will serve as a refresher for the expectations related to event reporting at WVU. All right, so first off, just an overview to sort of let you know how the presentation will go today. First, we're going to be going over some definitions, going right into what needs to be reported, why reporting is necessary. So you may think we're asking for a lot. So we want to give you that rationale behind and why we're asking you to report the items that we're asking you to report. Briefly, how to submit in WVU KC, kind of a broad overview of what should be included and attached. The potential outcomes when you do submit a report to report any event, and then of course leave time for questions. All right, so getting right into it, we want to set the stage with what is an adverse event. So we're going to start, there are many things that need to be reported, but we're going to start with adverse events and serious adverse events, just to make sure that we all have the same understanding of the definition for these two items. So first, an adverse event is any untoward or unfavorable medical occurrence in a human subject. So abnormal signs, symptoms, disease, and can be both physical and psychological harm. Where we transition to a serious adverse event is if you have an adverse event that is also one of these bullet points. So it results in death, it's life-threatening, it requires inpatient hospitalization or additional time in the hospital, so something unexpected, persistent or significant disability, incapacity, birth defect, and then of course the coverall, any other adverse event that in the medical judgment of the study team may jeopardize the subject's health. All right, so after that brief overview, and feel free to come off mute, or you don't have to, you can answer in your head. I don't want to put any pressure on anyone, but just thinking through these two scenarios. So are the following just an adverse event, or is it a serious adverse event? So the first one, a participant develops an unexpected, lightly itchy rash at the injection site of a study drug. So if we think about a light rash and we go back to our adverse event, it doesn't meet any of these criteria to be serious. So it's just an adverse event. It may be uncomfortable, but it does just fall into that untoward or unfavorable medical occurrence, an abnormal sign. What about the second scenario? A participant required hospitalization after protocol intervention. The intervention was expected to be outpatient. So in this scenario, we've transitioned into a serious adverse event. as it falls under the inpatient hospitalization or prolongation of existing hospitalization. So if something was expected to be outpatient, a patient requires or participant requires hospitalization, that's going to transition into a serious adverse event. All right, on to more definitions. Maybe not as exciting, but necessary to go through these definitions. All right, we also have minor protocol deviations or violations and major protocol violations and deviations. So those that are minor have no, big effect on risk or benefits, no effect on the data collected, and it wasn't a result of a study team willfully or knowingly doing something incorrectly. And a major protocol deviation is those that have harmed or pose a significant risk of harm to an individual research subject and sort of alter that benefit risk scenario where the risk has increased. And I do like to point out that the harm doesn't have to occur. It's just that there was the risk of harm. And another category of a major protocol deviation or violation is if the scientific integrity of the data has been collected. So if there's a situation where, there's a study where all these time points, certain things are meant to be collected, there could be a scenario where if a majority of those or some number of those are missed, that could affect the scientific integrity or usefulness of the data. And then again, if there's willful or knowing misconduct of the investigator or the study staff. And then lastly, if study staff have demonstrated any other serious or continuing noncompliance events according to federal, state, or local regulations. All right, so now we're gonna check our knowledge for minor or major protocol deviations and violations. So first, a deviation, no specified event, but just think about an event that would be a deviation that resulted in potential harm to a study participant. No actual harm occurred. So this is sort of what I highlighted in the previous slide, that even though there was no harm, there was the potential for harm, so it does qualify as a major violation. Second, a finding that doesn't affect the risk nor is likely to affect the participant's willingness to continue the research. So, for example, a study team used an expired consent form, but the content was the same. Maybe they just had continuation review and there was just a misunderstanding with the study team about what, that new consent was available. In this case, all the content was the same in the informed consent. The informed consent process wasn't jeopardized in any way. It was just sort of a clerical error, so that's minor. Of course, it's something we want to correct and make sure it doesn't continually happen, but is a minor violation. And then lastly, sort of a give me, if you have an adverse event that is serious, unexpected, and related to the research study, that's going to be a major event. All right, so now that we've sort of thought about these definitions, we're going to transition into discussing what needs to be reported. And I'll highlight that all of this information is taken directly from OHARP's reportable event SOP and also our website related to reportable events. We know that it's a lot of information, a lot of content, and so we try to make it as user-friendly. We are always open to suggestions. So if you see something on our website and you don't quite understand or think there needs to be clarification, please never hesitate to reach out. But for what needs to be reported, column number 1 are items that must immediately be reported. And immediately for us is defined as within 10 business days of discovery. So you've got some time because we know you need to maybe take care of the event, remedy the event, and attend to any participant needs first. So you do have sort of an extended time for immediately reporting. The only difference is the first one that we need to know within 3 days of an incarceration of the study subject. If a subject becomes a prisoner, that sort of triggers a whole nother series of events that needs to happen within the IRB to make sure that that participant can continue on the study or what's most appropriate in each specific scenario, as prisoners are a protected and vulnerable population per OHARP and FDA. And those other items that need to be reported immediately are any unanticipated adverse device event, any confidentiality or a data breach. So we have had those, and I've encountered those at previous institutions. And those ultimately are a pretty big deal that usually gets escalated with legal and privacy officers, maybe at the hospital, depending on what data was compromised. We also need to be notified of any allegations of, it should say non-compliance. You can tell us your allegations of compliance. Apologies for that typo, but allegations of non-compliance and any complaints. So if you receive a complaint from a participant, just let us know. And we will help guide you through the process to navigate that most appropriately. And if we hear, we have a mechanism for participants to complain on our website. And if we receive those, we would of course notify you. And then again, any major deviation or serious adverse event needs to be immediately reported. At continuing review, so when you submit a renewal in KC, the following items need to be reported. So you should be keeping a log of minor deviations and any adverse events that don't meet that definition of serious adverse events. All right. So another test your knowledge. Do you think these things need to be reported immediately or at continuation review? So first, a participant mistakenly receives 3 times the number of x-rays during a study visit. So I will admit, and I won't tell you what institution, I mean, I've only been at a couple, but this is a similar scenario, not exactly, to one I've seen before. And so this needs to be reported immediately because radiation is involved. And so that's going to fall under an unanticipated problem, a serious adverse event. So definitely report anything that involves radiation safety. You know, the potential for harm was there, so please report that immediately. Second, a study team member left their laptop with study information in their car. The laptop was stolen when their car was broken into. The laptop was password protected. So in this case, this also needs to be reported immediately. Even, I mean, the laptop is going to have to be reported above and beyond the IRB. But even if there are protections in place, this would still fall under a confidentiality breach. So it's definitely something we need to be notified of immediately. All right, third, a study participant has to reschedule their next visit to 3 days outside of the documented study visit time period. So this is minor, but should be documented within the study team's study documentation, their items, but can be reported at continuing review to the IRB because it's a minor deviation. All right. A study coordinator consents a participant on a non-watermarked version of the consent. So this is sort of similar to the example I gave previously of, you know, using an outdated consent. This would be minor and something that can be reported at CR, especially if the content is the same. You know, things would be different if it were the unapproved version of the consent, but in this scenario, we're talking about the approved version of the consent, just didn't have the watermark. But then if we add to this scenario that the study coordinator previously made the same mistake and received additional training on where to access the most recent watermarked version. I would say in this scenario to report to the IRB. If it's an event that's happened, even if it's minor, multiple times, this would fall under that scenario for a major deviation where study staff demonstrated continuing noncompliance with local regulations, in this case for the watermarked version. So if there are those items that you've identified, you've put an action into place for the minor issue, but then they recur, go ahead and report that to the IRB. All right, so now you're thinking, that's a lot of information. That's a lot of definitions to remember. And that's also potentially a lot of reporting to the IRB. And I will say, correct. And I will acknowledge that some events fall into a gray area. Unfortunately, in the IRB world, there are gray areas, and oftentimes the answer is it depends. Some things are very clear cut, but for those items that fall into the gray area, we would advise you to err on the side of caution. Feel free to reach out to our office, submit it. And if you feel as though it's not a gray area and you're like, this is very clear cut, regardless, definitely keep as much documentation with rationale about why you didn't submit until continuation review, or that decision-making process behind it. We determined this was an adverse event and not a serious adverse event because that rationale can be really important. And obviously the documentation, you all know, is critical with anything research related. But ultimately, the IRB is charged with determining whether an event is reportable to federal agencies. And so these are the three big things that must be reported, if applicable, to OHARP and or FDA. So of course, not every serious adverse event is an unanticipated problem, and not every protocol major violation or deviation. They're not all, rarely are they, in fact, serious or continuing noncompliance, but that decision-making authority is delegated to the IRB, and therefore the IRB needs to receive the information, review it, and be the ones to make that determination. So, we start with a big pot of reported items to the IRB and really funnel it through to make sure we're compliant with OHARP and FDA regulations in what they expect us to report. So this is just to prove that it is in fact in the regulations that the responsibility is delegated by both federal OHRP in 45 CFR 46 and the FDA in 21 CFR 56. And both are under IRB function and operations, that section of the regulation. And at WVU, we don't apply the official federal regulations to all research. We haven't checked that box, but we do apply equivalent protections to all research. So even if it's not something that's federally sponsored or something that isn't FDA regulated, these reporting requirements still apply. They just may not be reported to OHARP or FDA. But still report all your reportable events. All right, so more definitions. So we can see on this slide, one of the big three is continuing or serious noncompliance. So that's a failure. Serious noncompliance is a failure to follow federal regulations or our SOPs, failure to follow the determinations of the IRB, which in the judgment of either the IRB chair or the convened IRB, or the full IRB, increases risk to participants, decreases potential benefits, compromises the integrity of the WVU research office. Some examples, this also covers research being conducted without IRB approval, participation of subjects in research activities without their prior consent, whenever that requirement hasn't been waived, that can constitute serious noncompliance. And then important to note that a single instance of noncompliance may be determined to be serious noncompliance. So it sort of only takes one event. And I don't say that to be, scary or threatening, because we know researchers are doing their best. No one intentionally, is seeking to have these determinations, but it does happen. Continuing noncompliance is what it sounds like. So there's evidence of repeat events, multiple scenarios where SOPs aren't being followed, federal regulations aren't being adhered to. The IRB may also consider failure to respond to a request from the IRB to be continuing noncompliance, or a pattern of minor noncompliance. So that's what those two definitions are. And then the other reportable event that or item that's reportable to OHRP or FDA that I'm going to talk about are unanticipated problems involving risk to subjects or others. So these are often, I like to point this one out. These can't be avoided at times. A study team can do everything correctly and still have an unanticipated event. That's why they're called unanticipated. So these are never perceived, it's not a failure on anybody's point if you're reporting an unanticipated problem. There may be identified ways to mitigate it moving forward, but that's based on the information that you've obtained by experiencing this unanticipated event. So all of these factors need to be true in order to meet the definition of an unanticipated problem involving risk to subjects or others. And if they do, it must be reported to OHRP or FDA, depending on the regulations the research falls under. And I also just want to note that this does apply beyond the full board. Most often, it's related to studies that are subject to full board review, but there are expedited studies that may have reportable events. You should be reporting anything that meets that immediate reporting criteria, understanding that for most expedited studies, there is no continuation review. So it will be on the study teams again to maintain that internal documentation of those minor deviations and violations. The one caveat being that for expedited category 1, that is the category that falls under FDA regulations, that does require an annual continuation review, that event log can be attached at renewal. That's in contrast to the rest of the expedited categories that fall under OHRP that per the new common rule don't require continuation review. And it's also important, a reminder, we have lots of studies that use an external IRB that per the single IRB reliant SOP, study teams need to report any local events that happen to WVU, OHRP, IRB for review. We don't need to know about things that happen at other sites, but to cover the local context and review, any event that's happening at WVU should be reported. All right, so how do you report? So there is a build form, and these slides will be made available to you after the presentation. So you can find the build form on this link. It's just our forms page under approved studies, and it's the WVU OHRP 08 research related report form. It asks basic information about the event for you to describe the event, an evaluation of maybe why it occurred, any supporting documentation you may have, and some evaluation questions just to get at whether the integrity of the data has been affected, if it will result in a significant change in the protocol, etc. And then this will get attached and submitted via a Notify IRB in KC with the specific protocol, under the specific protocol, and attach any relevant documentation here as well. And really want to emphasize that the more information, the better. So here's all the more information that you can include as you're filling out that form, and to provide a very clear and full, a holistic picture to the IRB of what happened, and allow you to demonstrate what steps will be taken to mitigate it moving forward. You know, the more information the IRB receives on the front end, the less sort of filling in gaps that needs to be done. The IRB doesn't have to make any assumptions. And also it can reduce the number, you know, sort of back and forths between the IRB and the study team to work towards a resolution. So the more details the IRB can receive on the front end, you know, sort of the quicker everything can be resolved. So in the event form, the key areas we want to focus: the description of the event. So be sure to include just clear, concise description of what happened and pertinent information only. You know, I'm saying more information, the better, but the more relevant information, the better. And focus on the facts. And really think about, you know, I'll often write an email and see it a month later and I'll have no idea what I'm talking about. That is a bad example. You want to write it so that when someone unaffiliated with the study team comes in a year, 2 years later, they can read the summary of the event and understand what happened. So think about it from an outside perspective, because ultimately it will be reviewed by the IRB, who doesn't know all of the details, the specific ins and outs beyond, you know, what has been approved by the IRB of your protocol. And then also spend some time thinking about and describing why the event occurred. So a root cause analysis. You know, as you're talking about the event, keep asking yourself why. So if this event happened, why? Because A, B, and C happened. Why did A, B, and C happen? You know, continually reevaluating to make sure that at the end there's no more whys to be asked. You've identified them all. And then you know, the analogy is thinking about it as peeling an onion, to think about all those layers that may contribute to ultimately get to that true cause of the event that needs to be remedied. And then also include a corrective action plan. The IRB may have additional suggestions or clarifications, but often the study team is best positioned to identify how to avoid the issue in the future, and demonstrates to the IRB that we've identified the problem, we know how to fix it, and we've implemented what we think the solution could be. And a key is to make sure that, you know, this will get submitted, and to make sure that the corrective action plan works. And so I do want to note, you know, once this gets submitted and the IRB finishes their review, acknowledges it, even after some back and forth, if something goes wrong or the CAPA doesn't work as expected, that's going to result in you going back sort of to the beginning of the process to determine, okay, does this CAPA not working require reporting to the IRB? Can it wait till continuation review? It should probably be immediately reported to let you know that, you know, we had this plan, it didn't work. Here's our new plan, or here's a new event we uncovered because we applied the corrective action plan. So I don't want to say it's never done. It is, but just consider whether the initial event has really been remedied before you sort of put the lid on it. And then make sure that you are reporting it within the required time frame. Okay, so we want to demystify the process. So you've determined something needs to be reported, you've done the work, you've filled out this build form, you've gone into KC, you've selected notify IRB, you've included the build form, any additional documentation you've submitted. Now what happens? So there are a variety of outcomes. So just like to put a reminder of these ultimately reportable events to federal agencies. So if you're submitting something and your protocol is under expedited review, it may be that you submit the notify IRB, a reviewer looks at it and says, this looks good, all reasonable, study team acted appropriately, by reporting it. I see their corrective action plan, seems feasible, understood, we've acknowledged, you're free to implement this corrective action plan, let us know if things don't work out, but otherwise you're done. They may review it and say, I don't quite understand. I need these additional, questions or clarifications before I can acknowledge it. And it may also be deferred to the full board. So a reviewer might look at the notify IRB and say, I think this needs to go to the full board. This is a big event. And the convene board needs to make a determination as to whether this meets the following, the big three of reportable events. At the full board, same option, it could be acknowledged. There could be additional information required. This happens quite often at the full board, so don't feel as though you're not unique if you're getting additional questions. We hope that those tips and tricks in the previous slide will help. But again, it's not a big deal for the IRB to ask for additional information. And then lastly, the full board may determine that the event is reportable so that it meets the definition of continuing noncompliance, or it meets the definition of serious noncompliance, or it was found to be an unanticipated problem involving risk to subjects or others. So you'll notice that the determination about whether it's reportable or not, that is conducted by the convened IRB. So it's not just a single reviewer making that determination. It does always go to the full board. They're the only ones that can make that determination about whether it's reportable or not. And I will also note that per our SOPs, if the IRB determines that it is reportable, I will note that if the study team feels as though they can provide additional clarification, or in the interim additional information has come to light, we do have an appeals process. So that determination, you can submit one appeal, after which the IRB's determination is final. And if it is deemed to be reportable, if it's being submitted to FDA, we will ask the sponsor to draft a letter. If it's unsponsored, that's something our office can facilitate. We'll report. If it's OHRP, they have an online reporting mechanism. Again, if it's sponsored, we would ask the sponsor to do that. If not, we would do it. All right, so some takeaways. Overall, we want to ensure that you're aware of all reporting requirements, and we want you to be reporting all applicable events at appropriate times. So whether that's immediately, within 10 days, or it's at continuation review, or even if you have an expedited study where it's not required for continuation review, even though we may never see it, we want you to be tracking those and being aware of those minor deviations that happen. And if you remember nothing else, please remember that documentation is important. If there's ever a question about why an event was or was not, usually why it was not reported, it's important to have an accurate record. So the IRB may receive, a list of minor items that have been deemed to be minor deviations from a study team at continuation review. And they may have questions about, well, we believe this fit the definition of a major deviation and should have been reported immediately. And so that's when documentation is your friend, to show that the study team, the PI was involved in the evaluation of this, and this is how the decision was made. And then again, please always provide as much relevant detail as possible when you're reporting events. This allows the IRB to effectively evaluate the circumstances and make the correct determination, because we want to be reporting the events that we should be reporting to OHARP and the FDA, but we also don't want to be reporting things that we don't need to. So we can hopefully work together, study teams, IRB, OHARP, to get an accurate representation of what's happening to be compliant, with federal regulations. That's our ultimate goal. And with that, I'll leave it open for any questions.
Like Cassandra said, feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand or place something in chat. I will just say Shelley Welch had to drop early. She said thank you and she appreciated the presentation, Cassandra. Any questions or comments for our presenter? All right, well, hearing nobody, I'm going to go ahead and close out. Cassandra, thank you. Oh, wait, they're coming in. Hold on. Do expected events need to be reported? For example, there are some side effects of things.
So it would depend on, so most often I'm going to say no, but unfortunately the answer would be it depends. So if it meets that definition of a serious adverse event, so if it's something that becomes life-threatening, but ultimately if it's expected, it's most often not going to require being reported. That's a good question.